Hey Meissner makers, it's Jennifer here, and it's Wednesday, 1 o'clock. We know what that means. It's time for Wednesday workshop at 1. So today what we're going to be taking a look at is one of the projects from the spring edition of the License to Create bundle. Now, if you don't yet have a License to Create bundle, the techniques that we're going to be talking about still apply to other projects that you may have in the back of your mind or that you may come across as you are playing and planning in your sewing studios. So what we'll be walking through today is the Relax Collage Pillow. This is raw edge collage applique. So we're going to be creating the background area. Now you could do this for a pillow top, you could do this for quilt blocks, wall hangings. The collage technique is the same whether you're stitching through the Relax Pillow from your License to Create spring bundle or whether you're creating another project. So we're going to first look at how we create the background, how we create the collage. The second thing we're going to do is take a look at matchstick quilting. It's a very fancy name for lots of rows of very closely spaced straight line quilting. If your machine has a straight stitch, you can do this. If it has a slightly wonky straight stitch, you can do this. The rule isn't so much that it has to be a straight stitch, is that you are stitching consecutive rows of parallel lines. You could even intentionally choose something other than a straight stitch and go away from that very traditional matchstick look. So we'll be talking about matchstick quilting. We're not going to be embroidering today, but I am going to share some tips for how to position your embroidery design should you choose to add that to your pillow. And then we're also going to talk about adding the lettering. Now in this case, the lettering was done using a heat set vinyl product and our scan and cut to cut it. But you have other options here. We'll talk about embroidery, we'll talk about using some other techniques in order to get those letters cut if you don't yet have a digital die cutter or a scan and cut. All right, so first things first, we need to create our collage background. Now, if you are using the project out of the License to Create book and you have not yet looked at how this is laid out, it is on page 27 of your License to Create binder. And in order to stitch through this most efficiently at home, I would, as much as I like to jump right in, I would not jump right in. I would first read through the instructions starting on page 27, gather up all of the supplies that I need so that when I do get ready to sit down and stitch or create, everything is gathered and I don't have to do a lot of stopping or starting. So I'm not going to go step by step through everything here. I'm going to go over a little bit quickly so that you have the hints and tips to do this more efficiently in your own sewing studio. So the first thing that we're going to do is find the bamboo batting that's in our License to Create kit. Now bamboo batting, what I like about this particular product, it's made of bamboo. It's very, very soft and it's very drapey. If you're working on a project that's tightly quilted, you're going to like this because it still stays pretty soft and pretty drapey. Our pillow, with all its row after row after row of matchstick quilting, is pretty heavily quilted. The tighter something's quilted or the more quilting that you add, the stiffer your fabric becomes. So it's nice to have something that's pretty drapey as our base. So for the collage technique, you need a base. We're going to use our Angel Loft or our bamboo Angel Loft batting from Embellish product. And we're going to cut it, if you're following the instructions for the pillow, you're going to cut it to 16 inches. It's a 16-inch finished pillow. If you're creating something else, then you're going to cut it to about, I would say, give myself 4 inches all the way around, larger than my finished piece. So if my finished block is a 12-inch block, then I'm going to want to cut this to 16 inches squared. That way I have room for repositioning, for realigning, for getting in here and cross-cut or fine-tune cutting a little bit. Also, anything that you're quilting very heavily has a tendency to shrink up a little bit. So after the quilting we're done, if this were meant to be a 12 by 12 and I've cut it 16 by 16, then I'll just trim it down and it will look perfect and it'll be perfectly squared up. So first things first, we have our bamboo batting. Then the next thing we're going to do is choose a grouping of fabrics. So I have my fabrics here. Now this is going to be the most time-consuming part of the project, is choosing your fabrics. I wanted to have the effect of sort of the ground here and then a sky in the back. And I have to say, I did spend a little bit of time sitting around looking at my fabrics, wondering where to start. So you can benefit from my sitting around staring at fabrics all afternoon to get your project started a little faster. Anytime that you are putting something together from a design perspective, if you break your item, your project, your spacing into three, already you have a visual advantage. So about the bottom third of my pillow was meant to be the ground or the darkest area. The top 2/3 were meant to be the sky. So that gives you a good starting place. Choose something that you like for the foundation for the bottom, and choose something you like for the sky. So the very first thing that I did with my fabrics that I gathered is I had the one I knew would be the focal towards the bottom, something that visually is pretty heavy and dark. And then I needed a couple of what I would call greens, okay, or additional ground. Once you gather, and don't gather more than about 4 for a small project like this, or you will be overwhelmed with where do I use them all. So these were meant for my grounding, okay? And then one that's just a good dark. You need a little contrast in there, a little bit of zing. Then for the top part, for the sky, 2 to 3 blues, and then a yellow or a cream if you want it to be an early morning kind of a thing. I just liked the way that that looked. It kind of gave the impression of, you know, the sun kind of glinting off of the clouds out in the area. But whatever colorway works for you. Now, once you've done that, you have all of your fabrics selected. We need to prepare them for the collage. As you're looking at the finished project, there are some places where you have some overlap. What we need is a way to temporarily adhere these fabrics to our base so that we can then come back through and add all of the rows of quilting. So I have my batting cut a little larger than my finished project will be, and I want to make my life easy. So I'm going to start with fabric for the very bottom and fabric for the very top. So you can see on the piece that I've started laying out, I have one, this was just a strip of fabric across the bottom and a strip of fabric across the top to get me started and have sort of a place that I could begin designing from. Now, in order to secure the fabrics to the batting, you need to use a fusible webbing. So we are going to be working with the Embellish Foolproof Repositionable Webbing. I've already adhered some to my fabrics, okay? For this, the press works beautifully. I take my repositionable webbing, I place it with the fusible side against the fabric, it goes into the press. 5 seconds later, you've got a nice solid press on the back. From there, what we're going to do, remember I said I like to start with one piece down here on the bottom portion of the batting to go all the way across. That becomes my base. No rulers involved here. Oh no. We are simply going to take our prepared fabric and whack off a piece that will fit across the bottom of our batting. I'm not super worried about the fact that I have a little selvage that's showing here. It's not going to matter at the end. Now, once you've cut your piece of fabric, you do need to score the back of the paper, and then we're going to adhere it to the batting. Now, we're not going to iron it at this point. We're simply going to score it, peel it away, and position it on the fabric. We'll do that in just a minute. And then for the top on this one, let's see, I think we have a little sky fabric here. Let's get our prepped piece out of the way. And we want it to go all the way across the top of the batting. And when I'm cutting for those little soft rounded edges, I'm not doing anything other than just cutting. Now this is one of those places where you want to make sure that you have a nice sharp blade on your rotary cutter so that it's not perforating your fabric, because it'll perforate the fabric and it will also perforate the adhesive that's on the back, and it'll make it a little harder to remove that paper. So I would then remove the paper from the back, position it, whoop, this was the one we wanted for the bottom, remove the wax paper from the back of the fabric so that my repositionable web is against the fabric, lay it in place, and just keep cutting random pieces of fabric in varying sizes and shapes until I like the way that it looks and until all of the batting is covered up. Now, when I stitched this up the first time, my sample piece, I wondered to myself, could I not just put repositionable web on the batting? And the answer is no. Okay, and the reason being is that as you start to lay these out, also you don't want to fuse these in place until you're happy with the positioning. As I start laying everything out and getting happy with my collage and the shape that it's taking and the way that it looks, you'll notice that I have places where the fabrics overlap each other. So if my fusible web is only on the batting, any place where the fabrics overlap, there isn't going to be anything to fuse them down and hold them in place. Okay, so you really do want to apply the fusible webbing to each of your fabrics, chop them up with the rotary cutter. When you're happy with the way they look, remove the backing. You're just going to take a stylus or a pin or your weeding tool, come in across the back, remove the paper, and once everything is positioned the way you like it, as I have here, you're going to take it either to your iron or to your press and fuse everything in place. Okay, so to just go back quickly and review, our batting is cut about 4 inches larger than our finished project. So in this case, this is a 16-inch pillow. I would have started with a 20-inch piece of batting. The next thing that I do is gather all of my fabrics that I'm using for the collage. I will apply the embellished, repositionable, foolproof webbing to the wrong sides of my fabric using either your iron at home or using your press. It's a little faster with the press. I will then take those fabrics and just start chopping them up with my rotary cutter, positioning them on that foundation batting. When I'm happy with where everything is, I will then remove the paper from the reverse side of the repositionable web. It'll stick. It's got a little tackiness to it, right? Like this piece is done. It sticks. And now I'm going to take it over to the press, fuse everything in place, and then we'll go to the machine and we will stitch those rows of quilting. Okay, are we ready to stitch? Okay, so a couple of things before we start stitching that I want to remind you of. First one, I neglected 2 points. Number one, there's a great little piece of cork that's used in here as a partial embellishment. And I put that on last. I want it just to replicate the look of a road. So that was one of the last pieces that I put on. I didn't want to bury any of those edges. The other is that to mark my first row of stitching, I used just a strip of my pink embroidery perfection tape. If you're stitching along from your License to Create bundle, you're going to find your pink perfection tape is included in that bundle. So I have that to mark my first row. Now, does it really matter where that first row goes? It does not. I like to work from the center across one side, then the center and back out in the other direction to minimize any possible distortion. Now, as far as thread is concerned, in your License to Create spring bundle, you're going to find several spools of embellished 40 weight matte thread. So this is an embroidery weight thread. The difference between this and the traditional embroidery threads that you're most likely accustomed to is this one doesn't have a sheen. This has a soft matte finish, so it has more of a vintage or a hand look type effect. And so that's what I'm going to use for my rows of matchstick quilting for today's project. Now, I would strongly recommend that you do work with a walking foot on your machine, walking foot or an even foot feed, depending what machine you're looking at. I prefer this over engaging something like a dual feed on some of the machines that are equipped with that feature. And the reason being, with a walking foot, what's happening is that the fabric is lifting in conjunction with the feed dogs and moving that fabric in an up and down kind of a motion, or in a forward walking motion. What a dual feed program feature does is it's more of a helper, right? So it's going to give you a little help versus a lift and a move. So I would definitely, because we have multiple layers here, put on that walking foot, attach that walking foot to my machine. So once I have the walking foot in place and I am using a straight stitch, I am going to guide the inside toe or the slit, find something for a visual on your presser foot right along the edge of that tape. That way, my first row of stitching is going to be nice and even and perfect. Now, I tend to be in a little bit of a hurry when I'm sewing. I'm sure that comes as a surprise. And for this project, because remember I said we cut our backing a little larger, we're going to be trimming it away later. I'm not going to worry about tying off any of my starts and my stops. I'm simply going to stitch. This is something you can go, a little bit quickly. It's not something where you have to go very, very slowly. It's just a row of straight stitching. And we're going to go from one end of the project to the other. Very, very simple. Now once I do finish that first row of stitching, because we are going to be moving up and down, up and down, up and down, I will remove the tape. Okay? There's no reason for it to stay here. If we remove the tape, then we can just turn this around and continue back down the other side. Now when you continue back down, remember these are rows of stitches that need to be one next to the next, next to the next, next to the next. Okay? You want them parallel is the word that I'm looking for. Choose something on the presser foot. This is traditionally about a 1/4 inch of distance or less from one row to the next. It just so happens that if I let the outside edge on this particular foot, so you're going to have to check this on your brand of machine with the walking foot that you are using. If I let the outside edge of the toe of the presser foot ride right along that prior row of stitching, then I'll get a nice consistent distance from one row to the next. Caution. Some of you at home are thinking, well, what if I move my needle position over to the left about 3 clicks because I want it to be a little closer together? That's fine if you stitch every row going in the same direction. If you sew from top to bottom, then bottom to top, then top to bottom, and you've moved your needle position, you're not stitching the same depth from the prior line each time you go through. If that sounded like Greek, try it on a swatch piece. You'll see exactly what I mean, and then you'll leave your needle position where it was. Okay? Just will make your life easier. It'll be one less thing that you have to think about as you're stitching your rows of matchstick quilting. Now also, if I were at home sewing before I committed to this first row of stitching, I would, on a swatch piece, just test my stitch length. Sometimes I like a little longer of a stitch length or a little shorter of a stitch length, particularly with this thread. The map thread is a little heavier than a standard sewing thread, and so you may want a slightly longer stitch length. Again, I'm not even worrying about what's happening at the end. If this is, causing concern for any of you and you're like, oh my gosh, she didn't cut her threads, it's okay. You can cut your threads at the end. I'm just going to go one row after the next, after the next, after the next. Although you do want to watch that your threads don't get caught underneath your presser foot if you're not taking the time to trim them at the end. It is not the machine's fault if they get caught. It's my fault. Now, as much as I would love to sit here and stitch with you longer, this is as complicated as it gets. Matchstick quilting is honestly nothing more than row after row of parallel stitching that is equidistant from each other. If you happen to end up with one row that is slightly off, It is not going to matter and no one is going to notice. We are shooting for equidistant and parallel. Okay? If you end up with one that's off, it's not a big deal. It's a design element. This has batting up underneath. Once it's washed or even steamed just a little bit, it's going to relax those fibers. Okay, so we're going to stop here for just a moment. And you can see that we just have row after row after row, and they are not 100% perfect, but once everything is done, they're going to look pretty darn close to being perfect as I work across the pillow. So once you have completed all of your rows of stitching, then we're going to go and attach the embellishments. Okay, makers, once you have completed the stitching that's going to secure all of the components of your collage together, you then have some decisions to make about what you want to do next. If you are working on the bicycle pillow from the License to Create Spring bundle, then the next thing that you would do is stitch the bicycle, embroider the bicycle in place. There is a little bit of thickness here with the batting, so you may want to use a magnetic hoop if that's available for your machine. Before you get ready to embroider, I would encourage you to print off a design template using the sticky printable template paper that was included with your kit. If you're not working from the kit and you are creating a project on your own, sticky printable template paper is amazing. Now, if your machine has a camera or it has the scanning function, that's super helpful for lining everything on your project. This takes you one more step further with those machines, and then for the machines that don't have cameras or scanning functions, this gives you a way to be able to hoop properly and get your design in the right spot. So for these particular designs in your License to Create bundle, you're going to find the PDFs are already there and ready to print. So I simply put my printable template paper into my home printer, and it prints out my template to the size of the design. Okay. The back side of the paper releases. And actually, before I remove that, I don't need to work with that whole piece of paper. All I need is the portion that has the design on it and then the crosshairs, the grid. Okay, so I am going to trim this. Oh my gosh, she's using fabric scissors. It's okay. Scissors can be sharpened. The world will not come to an end. Okay, this is the part that I really need. So we'll pull off the release paper. And at home, I would encourage you to have a pin close by because that will make it a little easier. There we go. We're going to pull that release paper off. Don't get rid of the release paper. These are repositionable and reusable. So I'm going to take my template and decide where on my base I want it to go. I'm going to position it right about here. Now, word of caution, it is possible to embroider over cork, but it will change the look of the cork. So you may, if you've not embroidered on it before, you may find that you're going to be a little happier if you position the bike or the embroidery just above so that it doesn't stitch through the cork. So by using my printable template sheets, I can see exactly where this is going to go in relation to my project and make sure that I'm happy with where it is. So at this point, I would then take it to my embroidery machine and I would stitch that design, or you may be stitching another design. And we've done lots of videos on embroidery, so for today, we're not going to go through that process, but just take a look through some of the prior editions of Workshop Wednesday, and you will find some tips on embroidery. Then once your embroidery is complete, if you want to add the relax sentiment, you can do this a couple of different ways. If you own an embroidery machine, and you would if you're stitching this pillow and you're the embroidered version of this pillow, all embroidery machines come with built-in lettering of some kind. So you could choose to create the word relax or something else, whatever it is that you want to embroider on your pillow, and then embroider your text wherever it is you think that it's going to look good. If you're working from the License to Create bundle, there is an SVG file in there for cutting using your digital die cutter. And there's also a piece of the foil as well, the heat set foil. If you've not worked with heat set foil before, this stuff is amazing. It's beautiful, it's shiny. It is the quickest way to add a little something to a project without having to work really hard. So this has already been cut. We do have some prior editions of Workshop Wednesday where we walk through how to cut your vinyls out. So for the purpose of today, you may want to go back and watch one of those if you've missed them. This has already been cut, but I do want to share a weeding tip for you. When your designs are cut with your digital cutter, when you're working with vinyls, you're going to have to peel away or pick away or weed the excess vinyl. So this one's 99% done, right? We've removed all of the excess vinyl from the carrier sheet back in this area. I haven't removed it from the center of the letters yet. And the reason for that is I want to point something out to you. If you look at the reverse side, okay, and this is the side that we're weeding from, you can't weed through the carrier sheet. You have to weed from this side, from the reverse side. It is extremely difficult to see where the cutting line is on the back side of my vinyl. I like to use the daylight wafer. This is going to light up and I'll be able to see through and see exactly where those weeding lines are, so it makes it so much easier for me to get in here and remove that excess vinyl quickly and easily. So just a suggestion or tip for those of you that work with digital die cutters and you're working with really anything, whether it's paper or vinyl, it is just much easier to weed when you're using your daylight wafer box. So once this has been completely weeded, because it is on that clear carrier sheet, I am a strong advocate of previewing where things go. Ooh, I kind of like that. I would then take it to my press it in place, and then complete my pillow top or my whatever project I happen to be creating using the collage and embroidery technique. So that's everything for today. If you have questions, comments, things that you'd like to see on future editions of Workshop Wednesday at 1, as always, send me an email at info@meissnersewing.com, or you can give us a call here at the main store, and that number is 916-920-2121. We'll see you next week.